Okay, so with this episode of Berserk, we finally finished Volume 28, and we got a little bit over Volume 29. Now, there was at least two things that were left out within this episode of Berserk, and that was one, the introduction of the old prophet. If you guys remember him, he is one of the Kushins who actually plays, you know, a role later down the line. There's actually also, I believe it was the Kushin King or whatever, that we also missed introductions from. We really should have got that from, you know, the past few episodes of Berserk. They really should have been introduced beforehand, before coming into this episode. So I'm really actually surprised they did not, you know, introduce them, because they do play a role, you know, into the bigger picture later on as the series goes on for Berserk. So there is the introductions there that were left out, and then there was also another part of the manga left out in Volume 29, where we see the fight with Isidro and the pirate and Mule as well, fighting about in the streets. And there is actually one person who aids them during the fight, or in a way kind of aids them, and that is Azan. Azan actually makes a return. If you guys remember, he is the big, burly looking dude with, you know, the huge staff. Yeah, from the Holy See, you know, usually one of Serpico's and Farnese's posse, so to speak. So we missed him, because he does actually appear later down the line. Maybe they'll include him, you know, in the next season of Berserk. I have no idea. But as far as those two things goes, those were really the major things that were just left out, at least when it came to this episode. But everything else was pretty much adapted to a T. Now, my overall thoughts about this episode is pretty much mixed. I just thought it was okay. I didn't think it was bad, nor did I think it was exactly good. But it did feel a lot better than what I saw in last week's episode of Berserk, because last week's episode of Berserk just felt all over the place, in my personal opinion, due to its pacing, and the CGI actually looked a lot worse than what we have seen, just in my personal opinion at least. This episode, however, it was a pretty decent episode. So, I mean, it wasn't particularly, you know, good, but it wasn't particularly bad either. It was just decent. So, that's how I feel about the episode. Now, what exactly did we get that was contained in this episode? Well, mainly this was just a breather. It was a, you know, sort of like a break episode in which we see our characters just taking a little break, wandering throughout the city as they are, you know, resting up to go on to their next destination in their adventure. So there's really not a whole lot going on, but this episode did focus on Shirake a little bit more so than usual, and we actually see her meet up with Sonya later on. And if you remember, Sonya is one of Griffith's henchmen, so to speak, more so like the seer, but she makes an appearance in this episode. We also have Mule that makes an appearance in this episode as well, who is also part of Griffith's little posse, and we have it to where Sonya ends up telling Shirake this story, a different variation of the ugly duckling, which actually plays a bit of importance later down the line, because actually this story foreshadows not only Sonya, but also the other characters in Berserk. Like Sonya, you know, represents herself as some sort of brown kite, while Shirake was referenced to be an owl. There was also dragons in the story that she told that could be apostles, and the White Hawk obviously being Griffith, telling the story on how exactly Griffith came down to save, you know, the ugly duckling, so to speak, because she was different, which is Sonya. There was also one part in the story in which she actually talks about a duck princess, and as far as, you know, a princess goes in the story of Berserk, we can pretty much tell who that is, which is Princess Charlotte. And she states about the ugly duckling story that the duck princess who had been captured by the Crow King was rescued by the hawk. Now, I believe in this story, the crows were actually referenced to be the Kushins, so we do have a Kushin King that should have been introduced within, you know, this, or actually just in the last episode in general. The Kushin King should have been introduced, because it would, see, this like, story would make a lot more sense if that was the case. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. The Timid Ducks wanted the White Hawk, which is the other ducks, as the Midlanders, wanted the White Hawk and the Duck Princess to mate so that they would have a strong tie to the hawk. The young kite was not amused, excuse me. She was the only one who could fly in and feel the same sky as the hawk, but it didn't matter. So in a sense, we see that Sonia, you know, actually has romantic feelings for Griffith and wants to be as close to him as she possibly can. However, she's kind of, you know, blockaded by that fact due to Princess Charlotte. So this actually shows us in this story for events to actually come about. Because as we see this story play out, we actually see events that we have already seen in Berserk. We have Sonia, or the brown kite, that was rescued by Griffith after being captured by the Kushans, and we also have another portion in which we are kind of already seeing play out, which is we have in the Ugly Duckling tale, we have all the ducks here, which represent the Midlanders. We have crows being some of the Kushans, which can end up popping up later down the line. We have dragons, who kind of represent apostles as well, and there's various other things. Oh yes, and also right here is the hawk, which is Griffith. So it kind of just shows that Griffith is leading an army, not only filled with apostles, mind you, but also humans as well, almost as if they will be working together or something of that nature. So already right here, it kind of foreshadows the events to come about later down the line as we go on throughout the series of Berserk. So regarding that factor, the story of the Ugly Duckling is pretty much the biggest thing that we really need to get out of this episode. Everything else was, you know, it did involve stuff within the manga, but it wasn't really as important, so to speak. I think the only other thing to mention when it comes down to this episode of Berserk is that Mule also makes an appearance as well during the fight with Isidro and some of the other villagers, and then we also have that pirate stepping into the fight. And regarding the pirate, definitely look out for him later down the line, because he will appear yet again. And that's really it when it comes down to the episode of Berserk. I mean, overall, it was pretty good. They took a slower approach to this episode, which I thought was good after what we got in last week's episode, because while, yes, they did adapt the story from, you know, last week's episode of Berserk, you know, to a decent level, it did feel off in its pacing, and I'm just glad that now in this episode we actually got some better pacing. But there were even things left out when it came down to this episode, and stuff that should have appeared in the other episodes that would have made more sense within the Ugly Duckling tale. So when it comes down to this overall episode of Berserk, I thought it was a decent episode. I thought it was okay from what we got in last week's episode, because I didn't really like last week's episode. But when it comes down to the overall adaptation of Berserk for this season specifically, Berserk 2017, I think it's on the same level as Berserk 2016. You know, there's obviously a lot of problems with this adaptation and a lot of things that fans will complain about. I don't particularly hate, you know, this adaptation of Berserk, because I am in fact glad that the studio is actually adapting the, you know, Berserk manga, you know, something that we haven't received in 20 years. We haven't received another adaptation of Berserk in 20 years since the original. And also, there was also the movies, but I'm talking about TV anime here. So, like, you know, I don't particularly hate this adaptation, but I don't particularly like it at the same time, just on how certain things are handled within it. And the only thing that's really making me watch, you know, this series of Berserk is because of the fact that I'm a fan. That's the only thing that is holding me up. There are going to be things that I will complain about. A fan should complain about stuff that he, you know, dislikes about a certain given series, even if it's his own, you know, one of his favorite series, you know, in terms of manga at least. But yeah, I think that about does it for this final review of Berserk 2017. I have no idea if we will actually get a Season 3 of Berserk at all. I mean, it did hint at the possibility, as it said the story continues. So this obviously means that another adaptation of Berserk could continue, which would, I mean, while I know I don't really like the whole 3D look and presentation of this adaptation, getting Berserk content is something that I'm glad we're at least getting, so I don't really have a problem with another season. I mean, we're all living the eclipse already, so we might as well continue watching it, right? But, I mean, it does seem, in all seriousness, it does seem as though, you know, we are getting another season of Berserk. As to when that is, I have no idea. For all we know, it could be next year, in 2018, as, you know, it kind of seems we are getting Berserk adaptations yearly. 2016, 2017, we might receive one in 2018, so who knows? I mean, we could be getting one in 2018, we could be getting one sooner, but for all we know, we could even be waiting just as long as we did for another Berserk manga chapter to come out after Guts finally got off the boat. And trust me, that was a long ass time. So if you are going to, you know, make us wait that long, I really hope that you improve upon the stuff, you know, regarding, you know, what's contained within that season. Like the pacing, the animation, everything else. Because trust me, when it comes to the later portions of the Berserk manga, especially volume 34, that shit needs to be presented well. That shit needs to be presented well. Because, oh my god, just the amount of shit that ensues in that volume alone, oh my god, that's something that I'm really scared about. So, if you really are making us gonna wait that long, please focus on, you know, the episode. Take your time with it, you know. So, I don't know, let me know what you guys thought about this episode of Berserk, as well as the series overall. What did you think about Berserk? Did you like the 2016 version better, or did you like the 2017 version better? What was your favorite moment in the series? Like I said, mine was the Berserker armor, because that shit was hype as fuck. Be sure to give this video a like if you enjoyed. Hit that red subscribe button down below if you want to stay updated to my future content on this channel. If you're a new viewer, as I will be posting daily anime and manga content here on the channel. And yeah, that about does it for this video, everyone. I'll see you all in the next one.